Hello,
Hello.
how are you?
I'm all right. How are you?
Not too bad.
Good.
Sorry about if the lighting is dreadful. We have no sun up here in north of Manchester.
Sorry if you couldn't see anything bouncing off my
Actually, I
bald
was
head.
about to
I
say
don't have any
your
hair.
bald head might reflect into my
It might do.
car.
We'll use that. So today we are talking about when things go wrong. They don't go according to plan. What do you
Yeah,
do?
I know it's a difficult one. We had this last week. Our plans didn't go quite to plan. Internet cut out. I got pushed for time, and then it all fell apart, didn't it? So we didn't actually get this out on time, which is annoying. It annoys me. So we're going to do it now instead, and it will still be on YouTube and all that, because you can still catch up, which is good. But what did we do, Paul? We didn't panic, did we?
We didn't panic. We just rescheduled it. It's fine. It's easy. Absolute breeze.
Exactly.
But we see this happen. I'm sure you see it happen a lot with your cycling clients. And I had clients who did the Great South Run this weekend. 100% of them did PBs, which I was obviously over the moon with. But that's a long time in the making, and not everything went right every day, every week, every month. Not every session went according to plan. And you can have many different things in place to help deal with that. And I think with the one thing that really helps me as a coach and for a client is to still have an understanding of why it went wrong, what wasn't quite right. So you can come back down to anything. You're supposed to run a session and you're supposed to hit certain times for it. Have a look back over your training. Have you recovered enough? Have you eaten well enough that day? Are you under more stress? What's your sleep been like? Are you hydrated enough? All these things play a huge role in whether things go well or not. And all it takes is a day or two for you not to be looking after yourself well enough, or something out of your control happens, and your session that you go and do, or your run, doesn't feel as good as it should do. And that's where you need to recognize that's happening before it's happened, if that makes sense, so that you can reschedule what you were going to do. So, for example, with us last week, if Graham knew in advance that he was going to have connection problems, both emotionally and physically, and with the internet, then he could have let me know in advance, and we could have rescheduled. We could have rescheduled still. But the fact of the matter, we still rescheduled. But if you know that you're going to have a hard weekend, you've got a race, and then you've got stress at work, and you maybe know you haven't eaten well for a couple of days, you haven't got much sleep, and then you were due to go and do a hard workout, don't do the hard workout. Just do it in a couple of days' time, so that you are getting the best out of yourself. So it's great to have a plan and a structure in place, but that also needs to be flexible. So, and you need to understand when is the right time to not do something that's going to be detrimental to you long term.
Because sleep patterns, there's been a lot more research recently on sleep patterns, hasn't there, in terms of when is it cortisol levels, isn't it, when they spike and drop. And they're starting to find that there is a very good time to wake up and a pretty bad time to wake, because you can wake up right in the middle of that sleep pattern.
Tell my daughter this. Tell my daughter about this.
Yeah. Why she's always cranky. So that's another thing. I think that's one aspect that we probably have neglected research on in the past. And I know in terms of cycling, I know Team Sky are doing a huge amount of research into it. They wanted to bring their own caravans to the races so that the guys could get their own sleep, instead of having to deal with the stress of going into a hotel and then the bed sheets weren't made, or the beds, or they were in tiny rooms. At least then with a caravan, they knew exactly what their space was, what pillow they had. They didn't have to set it up. They could just literally get up out of it. And so there's all those kinds of things that come into it. So making sure that you keep your stress levels as low as possible, and just don't worry about what's happening as well. We all live very busy lives these days, and I think a lot of us can kind of get caught up in our goals and our aims and one or 2 days. If that leads into a week, we can start to get a little panicky as well. But we've just got to remember, just try and be as good as possible. So if you can't necessarily get your workout in, try and do something else. So be really good on your nutrition and your sleep, as opposed to doing that workout. Or even if you try and do something shorter, so do a HIIT session or something like that, just to reduce the amount of workload that you're doing, but increase the intensity. So you're still getting something done, but it just might not be on that scheduled plan that you had going.
And that's it. I think, like Graham's saying, it's important. It's very important that you do have a structure, you have a plan, but you need to be flexible around that, because life happens, things happen, things are going to change. And what you don't want to do is go into a session fatigued, tired, stressed, and that will damage your confidence. And in the type of when you're running and you're trying to run certain speeds for a certain duration, you don't want your confidence being dented and your ability to what you're able to do. So you're best off either doing half a session or giving it a couple of days just running easy or cycling easy before you go do your next harder workout.
The great thing of what we do with when we're in the studio and we're watching people's power output is we can actually see when people are fatigued as well. So that's a really interesting kind of addition into the training plan, is when we actually, a lot of people, when they do come in, they can be straight out of work, or they can just be waking up and just before going into work. So their stress levels or their cortisol levels can be quite high. So what they tend to start doing is kind of forcing the effort and trying to force their power to be higher than it actually can be, if that makes sense. So then what we can actually do is we can structure that workout to go, okay, right, things aren't quite going to plan right now. So then we can change that individual's plan at that specific time. The other guys that might be training with them can still do their own workout at their own ability and their own intensity. So I think that's a really interesting addition to training now, is the power aspect, and it completely changes an individual when they come in and stress levels might be high. So that's something to maybe think about if you're looking into cycling or want to come down to a studio.
Yeah, and I think the other thing as well is, if you know that whether it's your power or the speed you usually run at, and it's more effort to do it. So if you're out doing a run session, you say you usually run at 8-minute mile pace, and that's a real massive effort to do, then you need to just run slower and adjust what you're doing accordingly. It's about learning your body. And if you learn what your body can and can't do, then and what it should and shouldn't be able to do, through gaining more and more knowledge about training and what the effect of it all has on your body, then you're much more likely to know, right, today is not a day to be pushing myself, or I need to make sure that I run slower today, or I'm going to have a rest day. And the other thing you can do with that is make sure you know what your resting pulse is. So first thing in the morning, before you have any out of bed stress or worry or get going, is just take your resting pulse. What is it? And if your resting pulse is elevated by 10 to 15 beats, you're probably fatigued and tired, and it's a good idea to have a very easy day training wise.
So here's a question for you. So you do go out on your run, or you do go out on your cycle, and you think things are going all right, and then suddenly the plan doesn't quite work to the way you want it to. Either your times are wrong or the power's different. When do you know when to call it either quits or to take it down a level?
Depends what session you're doing. But, I mean, usually as soon as possible, really. As soon as that doesn't go quite right, it's time to reassess what that type of session you're going to do is, rather than trying to pushing through, because you'll end up just getting more fatigued.
And that, I guess, will lead to more injury.
Yeah. So if you're more fatigued, you won't be recovering as quick. Your form's more likely to go. You're more likely to get injured. And the big thing as well is a confidence. So I guess the key thing we're kind of saying is if you can understand what you should be doing in terms of what speed you should be able to run at, how that feels, if you're doing it and it doesn't feel quite right, or you're not hitting the times that you should be, it's a lot harder than it should be, and you're way off your times, then it's time to call that session off. But tracing it back even further than that, you can stop that happening if you understand how your body's feeling before you've even started.
Okey-doke. Sounds good.
Yeah.
So in terms of once they've figured that out and they kind of take things down a notch and they say, okay, right, things aren't going well, what steps should they put in place then moving forward? What should they do? We've talked a little bit about rescheduling, but is there anything else that they can do to solve that problem?
So when you're, what would you do for a cyclist for that?
For me?
Yeah. I should see if that would differ from a runner.
Well, when cyclists go out, a lot of the time it's usually because they haven't hydrated enough or they haven't eaten enough. And if things start going wrong, it's usually down to those two things. So when that happens, obviously the first thing to do is you start taking on more fuel. But then if you're looking to be shifting weight, you shouldn't be taking on the right fuel. So the wrong fuel, sorry. So for me, it's about just making sure that people stay hydrated and have the right nutrition. I think that's really, really important when they first start getting into training. So those are the steps that I put in before they start training more, increase the consistency of the workout. But then if things start going wrong, for me, it's usually fatigue that we usually see. So we would take a rest day is the first thing we do. We'd actually get them to come back in off that session if they're not feeling well. And that can either, whether that's their power numbers are down or they're feeling kind of fluey or ill, then we actually just take them off the bike and we do some stretching, we do some recovery kind of work. And then we take the rest day to just see how they feel. And then we get them back on the bike again the next, and we do a more kind of aerobic session as opposed to a strength and conditioning session, just because we want to make sure that the aerobic capacity is still working. And then we can kind of look at, we can start analyzing around that as well. So firstly, to kind of, prehab is food and nutrition. Make sure you're constantly hydrated and you're eating the right foods so that when you do start training, you constantly have the right amount of fuel to go out and ride. And then if it's not gone quite right out on the ride, then we look at taking you off, stretch, recover, make sure you get the right fuel back in, and then take that day off, and then we move on.
So for what I would do, similar thing really, but for a runner would be to, if something was going wrong at the time, or would be just to, like you say, I would just kill the session and say, well, that's enough, and just do a few strides, do some drills, and just come back to a bit of technique work. Take a couple of days off and then come back to it, making sure, like you say, the food and nutrition is good and the sleep's good. Chances are, usually it's because someone's overtrained or hasn't run slow enough on their recovery runs. So they've got the intensity of the training has been too close together. Yeah.
Because the other thing that we can find is that if people aren't consistent enough as well, they have an idea of what their numbers might be, and then they'll go out and try and do that same, sort of hit the same numbers or the same times, and they don't come close, and that can be kind of demotivating, and they can actually overtrain in that session. That's something you've got to be careful of, is if they're not getting the right amount of training in, the plan might go wrong because they try too hard. So you've got to make sure that
you've got to make sure all the right pieces of your training are being met. So if you're missing the same type of aerobic workout, which is working a very specific energy system every week, that isn't going to then support your anaerobic system, which means that when you start pushing yourself, you're going to fall off the cliff a lot quicker.
Amen.
Amen.
Right. I'm pretty much done there. Have you got any questions?
No, all good. Happy.
Hopefully that answers a few questions for everybody. And if you do have any other questions, feel free to get in contact with us either through Facebook or through the comments section on the website below. And hopefully that's answered your questions on what to do when things go wrong. So we'll see you at the next one, and have a great week.
See you later.
Ciao.